So for this week on CyberSchool, we're coming back from our little, maybe summer break, I guess you could call it, and we're going to revisit kind of talking about powering CyberData devices. We got a lot of questions about powering devices when we're recently out at a trade show, mainly just, why do we have an alternative power option for our paging series devices that we'll cover? And I figured it would just kind of be a good topic to go over, how the majority of customers power our devices, what power options are available, and then some options if you need to do some longer kind of remote installations for things like an intercom. So that's kind of what we'll be covering today. So to start, let's just kind of briefly go over what power options are available for CyberData products. Of course, PoE is going to be the big standard for all of our products because they all already need to be plugged into the network with a regular Ethernet cable. And if you're going to plug it in, you might as well supply power too. So the majority of our devices are going to use standard PoE known as 802.3 AF, which is 15.4 watts, your basic PoE, and then some of our products will use PoE 802.3 AT, which is 30 watts. Technically, I think it's 22.5, but I mean, everybody basically just says it's 30 watts. You can also use on certain products anywhere between an 8 and 24 volt at 1 amp dedicated power supply. For intercom style products, you want an 8 to 12 volt. And then for a speaker, you would want a 12 to 24 volt at 1 amp dedicated power supply. So there's a big variation there in between those. So definitely do your due diligence if you're going to go that route for, say, an intercom. Don't stick on a 24 volt power supply because you are going to fry that thing real quick. So, definitely do your due diligence, but that is available. And then also on certain products, you can actually just use kind of our regular power brick kind of adapter like you would use for, like a regular desk VoIP phone that wasn't PoE based or had, an alternative power supply. And the one that we use is just an off-the-shelf Cisco power brick. So, you've got a lot of different options to power CyberData devices, but I would say the majority, probably more than 90%, are going to use PoE just because, again, you got to plug the thing on, you got to plug the thing into the network anyway. You might as well supply power. So which option is going to be right? And it really kind of depends on the product with you're working with. There's no right answer because all the different products are going to have different power requirements. Things like intercoms aren't going to use very much power, whereas products like speakers, paging amps, or loudspeaker amplifiers or IP66 horns need a little bit more power. So there's no kind of end-all, be-all right answer. Although with that said, PoE is definitely the norm. Like I just said, probably about 90% or more of our customers just use PoE, and that can supply all of the different power options that your device would need, whether it's standard PoE or PoE plus. You can get that from a regular PoE switch. Granted, PoE switches can be a little expensive, but things like PoE injectors are also really, really helpful there. We get a chat here. Let's see. Oh, excellent. Cool. We've got a new attendee. Wonderful. Wonderful. Sorry, where was I? So we've got a lot of different options for powering devices. It really kind of depends on the particular product you're working with to really pick the right option. But again, PoE is basically the norm just because, you got to plug the thing into the network. So that's usually the right way to go. But there are definitely some situations where a, dedicated power supply or transformer or a power brick would be really ideal, or maybe even frankly a better option than PoE, which is a little strange to hear. But they could definitely be a better option in certain scenarios. So to talk about PoE more in depth, most of our devices, I'd say the vast majority of them just need the regular PoE, which is 802.3 AF is the actual name of the particular protocol, which supplies 15.4 watts of power. Some devices, the speakers, both the standard SIP speaker, the talkback speaker, the paging amplifier, the loudspeaker amplifier, the paging amp in a box, or the IP66 horn are all going to need PoE plus, that 802.3 AT, 25.5 watts, basically 30 watts. They will still absolutely function on regular PoE, but their volume output is going to be reduced just because those particular products, again, the speakers, the paging amps, or the IP66 horn, and all variations of those, They'll work on standard PoE, but because they're really designed for loud notification, PoE Plus gives them that little extra boost of power to really be able to push that audio out a little bit farther. The main ways that you can supply this PoE power is, of course, going to be a PoE switch. That's probably what the majority of people will end up using. However, a lot of the times, unless you're specifically looking for a PoE Plus compliant switch, something that can actually supply that 25.5 watts, you might not have that. If you're just going to, say, your big box store, you're calling your regular telecom distributor, and you're just asking for a PoE switch, and you don't say, I need PoE Plus, or, being a good salesperson, they don't necessarily ask you if you need that PoE Plus, or you don't even know what that means. You probably just got a regular PoE switch. So all of your ports are only going to supply that 15.4 watts, which is okay. Everything's going to function, but you're not going to get the full designed output of the units with that kind of power, which is where an injector can come in those types of situations. But injectors are also super powerful for places where you don't necessarily need to go out and, say, buy a big PoE switch. You don't need to buy a 6 or a 12 port switch if you're only going to be plugging in a single PoE product. If all of your other phones are just going to use your standard, wall warts or your power bricks, and you've got, one horn in a garage shop or maybe in an auditorium or something just to alert people, there's no real sense going out and spending a couple $100 on a full switch if you're only going to use one of those PoE ports, or you can go and buy an injector for 60 to 80 bucks and be able to power and utilize that product at its full extent depending on the injector that you get. This is definitely going to be our most used option in terms of supplying power to the products. Again, just because they need to be plugged in anyway, you might as well supply power. Again, assuming you have a way to supply that power and that data connection. So next we move on to a dedicated power supply, and these are really ideal for things like our intercoms or our speaker products. We're really just going to be focusing on the intercoms because that's really the ones that will run into this dedicated power supply scenario. And those particularly will be 8 to 12 volt DC at 1 amp. These are kind of very similar to, basic wall warts that you can get with a lot of different tech products. They're typically terminated with just a regular barrel connector, and you can kind of snip that off and make your own. Or, any kind of electrician would be able to have, one of these transformers in line, and they can just wire it in the wall to go and take, your regular 110 AC and then put the transformer in line to convert it to 8 to 12 volt DC, depending on whatever you need. As long as it's 8 to 12 volt DC at 1 amp or 1000 milliamps, you are good to go. And this is really useful in certain situations where PoE might not be available. Say, for example, that exact thing that we were just talking about, where, you've got wall warts or power bricks for all of your standard VoIP phones. You don't have a PoE switch because you never really needed one, and you want an intercom for your front door. Instead of going out and buying one of those switches, or, maybe shelling out, $50 to $100 on a PoE injector, you could talk to your electrician that's hopefully going to be wiring it in anyway, because we do recommend that. But, they might be able to give you a transformer for, maybe 20, 30 bucks. The transformers are definitely a lot cheaper just because they take a little bit more work to go and install. So that kind of, it's a little bit easier to work with. A little bit more work, but less expensive than going for a PoE route. And if you wanted to go this route of a dedicated power supply, you would use pins 1 and 2 of the screw down terminal, similarly on the speakers. So next we'll move on to a power brick. And what we have pictured here is the one that we actually recommend. I'm seeing some kind of poor spots on my crop job there. Oh well. So that one in particular is that's a Cisco Cube version 3. They do have a version 4 out now. The version 3s are a little bit hard to find, but you can still get them, as well as the version 4 will work. All of our paging devices are going to support this this regular power brick, which is very similar to a PoE injector in terms of how it works. You plug it into an AC wall outlet, and then you plug this into the CyberData device. However, you're still going to need to plug it into the network, just because this little basically power brick does not supply that network connection. You'll still need to plug it into the network regularly. And the products that you can do this on are going to be our SIP paging adapter, our SIP paging server, and the Informacast-enabled paging adapter. This one in particular is a 48 volt DC barrel connector style. So, it's just kind of got that kind of longer plug. I mean, a barrel connector is really the best way to explain it. It kind of looks like a barrel. And the reason that we targeted these, that kind of style, is because, frankly, a lot of our customers initially, when we came out with these products, were using Cisco phones, and they had, extra of these power bricks kind of laying around. These power bricks were pretty easy to get your hands on, and they're fairly cheap. So they became a really great option for powering these paging devices. They're really only on these two particular products and their variations of it. We didn't really expand these out to say like intercoms or speakers or things like that. It's really only on this particular dedicated power brick. And these are super duper powerful and really useful in certain situations because a lot of the times these paging adapters or those paging servers, they're not really going to move, and they're typically going to be mounted, say, in a telecom room, a telecom closet, or maybe an area where you've got, your analog amplifiers, if you have that kind of stuff split off. And you're probably going to have a PoE switch in that room, and that might be, say, a full, 32-port PoE switch, or it might be, a 24-port switch with 12-port PoE and 12 regular. And instead of eating up one of those PoE ports, you could use a standard regular Ethernet port, non-PoE, and then plug in one of these power bricks to be able to save that PoE port for a device that might be, say like a CyberData speaker that would be down the hallway somewhere or in a different area of the building. So it gives you that kind of capability to be able to save those valuable PoE ports for devices that aren't easy to go and plug in a different power source, whether it's going to be kind of a wall wart and go for one of those kind of transformer styles for an intercom, or a power brick for one of these, or something like a speaker where, those are, you might not have as easy access to a regular AC wall outlet you can use PoE for, but because these products, the paging devices, paging adapter and paging server, are typically located in an area where there's no shortage of AC wall outlets, these are a great option and help you save one of those valuable PoE ports. So next, we kind of move on to long-range power. We've basically only covered stuff that would exist in the normal range of Ethernet, which is only 100 meters, which works out to be 328 feet for us Americans. So it can be kind of difficult if you need to do kind of a longer run for, say, an intercom. If you've got, a business with a really long front gate, say, a golf course that might have, a big fancy gate at the end of one of the big driving greens, or, hopefully in an area where the people coming into golf aren't going to get hit by golf balls, but, they're probably situated out in an area and they've got, these big fancy wrought iron gates, and they might not have a guard shack where they can go and stick one of the, stick a network switch to be able to tie in there. So different PoE range extenders are absolutely ideal for these types of scenarios. We get a decent amount of customers that run into things like these, especially different oil fields, big manufacturing areas. Sometimes universities, lots of different places have the need to put a PoE-based device in an area where they might not be able to actually go and put a switch and stick with that 100-meter limit. So these range extenders actually become super duper powerful. And the one particular brand that we're going to highlight today can utilize either standard Ethernet, so your regular Cat5, Cat6, coaxial, or Cat3, which is your old school phone cable. And the company that we'll be highlighting today, formerly, a sponsorship, we did receive these units for free when we tested them, we want to disclose that, are going to be the Patton CopperLink Ethernet extenders. These are really, really cool units. I personally got these and got to test these. These things, I was dumbfounded at how these things work. When we tested these, kind of sidetrack story here, we make a lot of cables and stuff in-house at CyberData. That's one of the things we kind of do as a side hustle, is we make a whole bunch of different cables. And as such, we had one of the giant boxes of Cat5 cable that you can get, at your hardware store or from Uline or, the big cable manufacturers, where you're dealing with, a huge amount of cable. I think it's I think it's a kilometer of cable. I think you're dealing with, 3,300 feet. I think we had used some of it, so I think it was about 2,500 feet left in the spool. Big, gigantic box of wire. And I had our guy that, kind of does all the cables and everything. Elio, I had him go and, take the box and, make this into a giant cable. And he looked at me funny. He's like, "It's not going to work." And I'm like, "Trust me, it's going to work with, this product that I have here." So you take the unit that's here on our right side, and this one comes with a nice little power brick with our kind of barrel connector style here. You can kind of see what I was talking about when I was talking about those Cisco power cubes. But this side of the Patton unit, this would basically be in your server room or where you're going to start this really long run. And the barrel connector, power adapter gets plugged in there, and your regular Ethernet network connection gets plugged in here. Then we took our really long line of, basically one end of the cable from the Cat5 cable from that box gets plugged in there, and that supplies the PoE power. So then that whole giant box of Cat5 cable is PoE energized, and you plug that into the line port here, and then the Ethernet port goes out. And the crazy thing with this, and we tested this with, I want to say it was around 2,500 feet. So, nearly a kilometer, way above what you can do under the standard rules of Ethernet. We were able to get full PoE power supply and full gigabit speed on the other side of that huge run of cable. So it makes these things super duper powerful for really long runs where you're not losing any data speed, which is, one concern you could have, and you're still maintaining that PoE power supply. So at that remote end, all you have to do is just mount this box somewhere and then route your cable to whatever PoE device you want to plug in. So it not only extends that full range, but you get the PoE support to boot. So it's really, really awesome for remote intercoms. It makes it really, really powerful for those types of situations. And they've got different varieties of cabling that you can use in between the two links, the kind of host link and the remote link, where you can use either that standard Cat5 like we did with the image that I have shown here. They've also got an option for coaxial cable. I don't think they can get as long with coaxial as they can with the Cat5. That's their longest, and they do tote with a kilometer. And, I trust it with what we tested. I think it'd go a full kilometer, which is just amazing. Again, 3,300 feet for us Americans. But, it's really stellar at the range that they can get with this. And then, for some reason, if you want to be old school and run with that, regular Cat3 old school analog phone cable, you can do the same. Again, you're not going to get that full kilometer range of it, but it makes these awesome for these remote intercom installations. So if you've got a really long driveway and you want to install an intercom there, say for, a really fancy building like we've got some over in Carmel Valley up in Monterey, these things can be super duper powerful where you can just stick this end in your guard shack, and then you have your intercom going outside of the big wrought iron gate, and provides that full duplex communication and that PoE and full gigabit speed at that remote location outside of the limit of Cat5, which is only 100 meters or 328 feet. So really, really cool option. I wanted to shout out these Patton ones when I decided to do this, because they did give us these units for free. Really awesome, powerful tool if you're doing these kind of long range drops. So at the end of the day, how should you power your device? Really, it kind of depends on what product you have. Frankly, things like speakers and intercoms, if you can, PoE is going to be ideal for that kind of plug-in, just because it's easy to work with. You got to plug them into the network anyway. But what if PoE isn't available at that location? Maybe you've only got Ethernet. Then you might want to opt for one of those alternative power supplies, either a transformer wired into the actual screw-down terminals, or if you're working with a paging device, you can just go and use one of the off-the-shelf power bricks to be able to power the unit. But another thing to consider is, can you even wire in a power supply? Either, do you have an AC wall outlet that you could plug, a power brick into, or do you have, regular AC power lines in your walls that an electrician could wire in a transformer for you? If not, or maybe you're dealing with a long range scenario, you might want to go for one of those Patton CopperLink PoE range extenders. They're super duper powerful units, pretty economical price point for what you're getting, and you get a lot of different cabling that you can work with. So, it really kind of, at the end of the day, PoE is definitely going to be the easiest option because you got to plug in the units anyway. You might as well supply power. That's going to be the most used way to do it. But just because that's the most used way to actually power one of our devices doesn't necessarily mean it's right.
Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, please contact our sales department. They can be reached at phone number 831-373-2601, extension 334. They can also be reached by email at sales@cyberdata.net. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like and subscribe for more content from CyberData.